Hey, I'm Ammon, and this is video, I think, 24 of our Being in Time series, and this is the video. Hey, I'm Ammon. This is video 24 of our Being in Time series. And this is a very exciting video because we have finally made it into the second introduction of Being in Time. Don't get too excited, we're not into the book proper, but we are into the second introduction, and boy, is it going to be a doozy. So remember, in the first introduction, we had largely been looking at thematic issues. What is the main theme of Being in Time? Which, remember, was this attempt to reawaken the interest into the question of the meaning of being, which Heidegger had sort of taken to be fundamental, not just to the history of philosophy, but in some way to the very act of meaning making and being human entirely. And this had gotten sketched out then in announcing the primacy of Dasein, to be there, human existence, what it means to be human, but again, we'll mostly leave it untranslated as Dasein. The primacy of Dasein as the main entity we're investigating in order to raise this question of the meaning of being. So to ask about meaning broadly, we have to ask about what it means to be human. And here in the second introduction, we're going to start to get our methodological toolkit in place. That's going to consist of 3 sections. Sections 5, 6, and 7 are how they're numbered. In sections 6 and 7, which we'll look at in later videos, we're going to see Heidegger introduce first the destruction or deconstruction, we'll talk about those terms, of the history of philosophy, and then phenomenology, the discipline I've talked a little bit about, that he's really coming out of. But prior to that, here in section 5, we're going to want to anchor the discussion in the first introduction, where we would announce this ontical and then ontological and then onto-ontological priority of the question of being, to temporality, which, remember, at the beginning of the introduction, or in the preface to the introduction, because there's even that, we had said was the thesis of the book was going to be that any possible answer to the question of the meaning of being, remember, Heidegger's not trying to answer that question, but he is trying to raise how we do answer it, is going to involve some theory of temporality. And he's going to want to preview that a little bit here in section 5. Now, I'm going to spend 2 videos on section 5, and it's in that second video that I'll mostly talk about how he does that. Prior to that, I want to do one other thing really quickly, and that's talk a little bit more about Dasein, but also I'm really excited because, as I'm sure you remember in your assiduous watching of the 23 previous videos, I spent a lot of time admitting that I'm a bit of a liar and that I'm a little bit of too much hashtag Team Poets. So it's nice to find out that I'm not alone in perhaps being misleading. So I'm not going to try to hold it up again because that didn't work so well, but I'm just going to read to you really quickly because I know that's why you come on TikTok, is for have McCoy Robinson's translation of Being in Time read at you. Just a little bit. In demonstrating that Dasein is ontico-ontologically prior, we may have misled the reader into supposing that this entity must also be what is given as ontico-ontologically primary, not only in the sense that it can itself be grasped immediately, but also in the kind of being which it possesses as presented just as immediately. Okay, whoo boy, right? Now, of course, if these were other videos and I was trying to tie this into history of philosophy, we'd all, and I'm sure you know exactly where I'm going with this, we would all be hearing some taking of sides with Hegel against, let's say, Locke, who we should always take sides against, with respect to what immediacy means and its value in philosophical inquiry. There's ways in which he's trying to sort of couch himself in a certain history here. I'm not going to worry about that too much. I'm going to try to talk about what he's saying here in a slightly different way, because ultimately what he's going to be trying to raise with this is questions related to, and this is going to be a huge part of the history of philosophy also, and some of the most valuable stuff in my mind in history of philosophy, questions around self-deception. So it's not just that Heidegger's not just misleading us, right? Under what conditions does Dasein mislead itself, right? So questions around self-deception, questions around self-opacity, the extent to which we don't necessarily know ourselves, right? Although he's reading it, or he's writing it in a very odd way, that's going to be what's at stake here, and this is going to show up throughout this first section. Let me explain what I mean by that. So, throughout the first division of Being in Time, Being in Time is going to be divided into 2 visions. Throughout the first division of Being in Time, not only is Dasein going to be our main character, but one particular existential instantiation of Dasein, one that's existentially very significant, is we're going to be looking primarily at Daywear Dasein. Now, that is not what Heidegger calls it. That's my own horrible name for it. Heidegger's going to call this Dasein in its what usually gets translated as average everydayness, Alltäglichkeit, right? what Dasein is like most of the time, what Dasein is like as it lives its ordinary life in its day clothes, right? And here's going to be the thing about that. So ontically, that's what we are most of the time. So presumably then, if ontically, this is what we are most of the time, we're trying to describe, and this is what gets people excited, I think, about Heidegger from this existential and pragmatic point of view that's been so important to his reception. We're not doing highfalutin stuff here. We're talking about what we're like most of the time. Don't we know what we're like most of the time? Well, I've already said that I'm too friendly to poets. And one of the main things that poets have convinced me of is that in point of fact, and maybe I'm revealing too much about my own travails and struggles in my life here, I don't actually think we know what we are like most of the time very well at all. And a lot of philosophers, and Heidegger here, are going to agree with me there. St. Augustine, in his Confessions, right, which is one of the books that sort of invents the genre of autobiography, at the core of it, and I've brought this up before, Heidegger's mentioned this before, Augustine will say that I was made a question to myself. Right? This is for Augustine, the core meaning of being human. Right? I was made a question to myself, and I didn't know how to answer that question. Questions around reflection, so self-reflection, self-deception, our ability to reflect on ourselves by taking, we use the spatial metaphor here, taking some distance from ourselves. These are going to be fundamental to a certain philosophical tradition. Right? And I've already said that this tradition will get us towards Hegel more than it'll get us towards Locke. And we always want to get more towards Hegel than we want to get towards Locke, because Locke is the fucking worst. But that's neither here for now. Let's leave that aside. I want to read you one other passage in this short video, and then I'll be done with this one, and we'll come into temporality next time. Thus, because Dasein is ontico-ontologically prior, its own specific state of being remains concealed from it. Dasein is ontically close to itself and ontologically furthest. But pre-ontologically, it is surely not a stranger. Surely not a stranger. Don't be a stranger to yourself. But you maybe can be, right? So we live, ontically we're closest to ourselves. We are how we act. We are how we interact with the world. We are how we make meaning. But ontologically, for a lot of different reasons, when we talk about these questions of self-opacity and self-reflection, understanding the meaning of our actions, understanding what they're up to, understanding what we're trying to do, understanding what it all amounts to, in a lot of ways, we're going to be worse at that than we are making sense of the world around us. It might be that our capacity to make meaning is much more easy to observe when we make meaning for other things than when we turn that inwards and look at ourselves in the activity of making meaning, right? And yet, that is at bottom, this is the pre-ontological or the ontico-ontological point, that is at bottom what we ourselves are. So in some way, we're always doing this, and it's a thing that we always know. It's deeply familiar to us, even though we don't know what it means. Now, in the second video, when we get into the end of chapter 5, we're going to see that this weird feature of ourselves, ontically what's closest, ontologically what's furthest, pre-ontologically not quite a stranger, that the weird status that we have on self-knowledge and this disquiet, this potential for self-deception, right at the heart of who we are, is going to be deeply connected for Heidegger to the hatred that we seem to have of time. So in the next video, we're going to talk about why we hate time.